Good morning, Helen. How are you?
Hi, it's great to be here. Yeah.
Thank you for making time for me. I've been meaning to interview you or sit down with you for a while now because I know you've been doing some really interesting research work in your current project. And I just want to have a conversation about it and see what has emerged from your research. So, could you explain very quickly, in a nutshell, what's your background, why you were a great fit for that project,
Mm,
and what the project was?
sure. So I've been working in the learning industry for 30 some years now, basically my entire career in different capacities, as a facilitator, instructor, in colleges. I started a master's in education. That's a whole other story about why I didn't finish that. And as an instructional designer, I did some gigs designing multiple choice questions for like inventories for standardized assessments. So like I really have had my fingers in a lot of different parts of the learning function. And I joined government over 10 years ago. My early start there was working on performance support tools at the CRA, which was a new thing then. Essentially, a performance support tool is adjacent to learning, but at the time was kind of a radical departure from how we've always thought about learning. And a performance support tool, if that's insider lingo, really, if you think about, for example, if I'm using Word to create a document and I have to create a table of contents and I don't remember how to do that because I do it once a year or whatever, there's a little help button, at the top of Word. I go in there, I type in table of contents, and it just pops up with a little pop-up and walks me through the steps. Super easy. And I'm able to succeed at the task of creating my table of contents. When I'm done, I close it. So basically, performance support tool helps you complete the task in the moment that the task is occurring. Now, if I was creating table of contents, every day for a few weeks, I might check that bubble 5 or 6 times, but for the 7th, 8th, for the rest of the time, I would have memorized it. But the nice thing is I know it's always there. So I don't have to commit any of that to memory. I just rely on the tool. And so that is an innovation that, like I said, has been adjacent to learning, but it's been emerging in the learning world over the last 10 years and now is standard practice in outside of the government. It's called workflow learning in a lot of places, but the emphasis on making the tools that people are using embed the learning right into it. And that's even getting fancier and fancier with all of this digital tech that we can do. So it could be now that if you're filling out a form for your job, let's say, as you enter the little box, a pop-up will just naturally appear as a beginner and it'll tell you exactly what to put in there and if there's any particular formatting. And then as an experienced person, you can just turn that function off. So that's, a really high level. Now, we don't call that learning, but the impact is that the employee is able to complete the task successfully. And if they repeat it enough times, they will learn it. But that learning is not necessarily the goal of that. The goal is successful task completion. So that it's related, you can see how it's adjacent to learning, but it's a different kind of conversation. Typically when people talk about learning, they talk about courses and acquiring knowledge and maybe improving skills incrementally. I'm less interested in that. In fact, I'm not interested in that at all, really, anymore. Human beings are natural learners. You have to work to stop a person from learning. So if an employee is not learning something, then there is a reason for that. And it's not because they're not taking the right courses. Often what we call learning problems are results of them not having the right tools, or there's something in the environment that's not, that's inhibiting their ability. So anyway, I went super broad there, but yeah, so I started in the government working on this performance support tool at the CRA. It was originally constructed for admins, and it's kind of an interesting story because what happened a number of years ago before I came in, that staffing was delegated to the managers. So I guess how it was before, when a manager wanted to hire someone, they went to a little center and the center would help them hire people. And then, someone had the great idea that they would just delegate all of that work to managers. And so when a manager wanted to hire someone, they had to do it themselves. And so what would a manager do? They would turn to their admin and say, hey, I need to hire someone. Please do all the stuff I need so that I can get the interviews and blah, blah, blah. And admins, as you know, is an entry-level function in the government. Admins generally come from outside of the public service. It's an entry level, so they often wouldn't even understand, like I love this at CRA, they call hiring resourcing, right? So an admin would go to the one place they had, which was the internal intranet, and they would type in hiring, and nothing would come up because, first of all, it's called resourcing. And then this poor admin, like all they could do was call a more experienced admin. And so originally, the learning function at CRA was tasked with creating a learning program for admins. And they realized that courses were not the answer, again, because one admin might only help a manager hire someone once in 2 years. And you can't give someone a course and expect them to retain that information that they're not going to apply until a year later. It's ridiculous, not how our brains work. So the genius, Joan Somerville, behind what was called Admin Corner was, she's like, admins need performance support. They need tools that pop up in the moment of need. And so we created this portal basically with all the instructions of all the myriad ways you can hire. And you can imagine, because you know about staffing, there's like a million different ways to hire people and all the different things. And from Admin Corner, then we started adding things beyond staffing, things like how to send a fax, how to send mail. Like, you know, it's difficult. If you're new, how do you send mail in the government? It's not easy, right? How do you do all the things? And then the CRA in their wisdom realized that, oh, this is useful for more than admins. We can expand it. So they started adding travel, you know, how to manage the travel system and how to procure things. And so now the site's called Know How. It still exists, and it's a huge part of the learning function at CRA.
I now I make the connection between the two. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I was there at the birth of Know How, and I'll take some credit for that because we did shape it a lot along the way. But one thing I wanted to say, you haven't even asked this question, and I have so much to say about all of this, but the interesting thing about Know How is a lot of the problems it's trying to solve are problems of bad tools. So let's take travel, for instance, and CRA uses the same travel platform that all of the federal public service uses. And that tool, if you've ever tried to travel, it's just a nightmare. It's so hard to use. The user interface is awful, awkward, it's clumsy, it's impenetrable. And so all these different places have devised workarounds to help their employees navigate this terrible tool. And that often falls to the learning function to create those tools. But that's a problem that should never have occurred in the first place. So creating courses, like we have a course to navigate Phoenix, again, first of all, like taking a course is not going to help you fix the pay thing, and we know that now. But so much blame was put on poor training that the employees weren't trained how to use Phoenix, and that's the reason it didn't work. Well, Phoenix was just super poorly designed, as is the travel system. Now, thank goodness we're redesigning both of those, and it sounds like they might be designed in the right way. I hope they have learning people in their side, because the function of a good learning person is imagining and helping communicate the user journey to the people who are designing it at the end. So as a learning professional, at the very core of what I'm interested in is, if this is the outcome we need from them to be able to do X, wherever they are now, how do I meet them where they are, and how do I support them on the journey to get there? That's the learning function. And anyway, so that brings me to where I am now.
So actually, it's a good piece of background to have, because it explains why you were interested in doing the work you've been doing for the past, how long has it been? 6 months, 8 months?
Yeah, thanks. I didn't even talk about that. Do you want me to talk about that now?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I'm really curious, because I know it's a very interesting project, but I don't have any of the details.
Yeah, so the organization that I'm working at now recognizes that the learning function, again, I use that specifically, and we'll probably get into that later, but needs a revamp somehow. Broadly in government, learning has not kept up with the rest of the world. In fact, as a professional, that was a decision I had to make. I know that by staying in the public service, that my ability to leave has been encumbered, because we're just so behind the times. It's kind of embarrassing. So anyway, this organization recognizes that and has built a small learning and research development team. And so we sort of have three tasks. One was to engage internally the organization to find out like what's the current status, what do employees, what's their experience from also employees, but also from their managers and from senior people, you know, just what can we learn about the current status of this. And my particular role was to do a scan of the external environment, so that included other government departments in different, like international as well,
Okay.
in the same, also including in the same, like it's sort of in the financial sector. So looking at that a little bit as well. And then do some, you know, kind of broad literature review and just looking at the latest. So it was a really kind of a general scan, but like just what's going on in the world that we might learn from. And so that got written up into a report, and that's now been presented. And the next step will be, okay, now that we've got all these kind of artifacts by looking at the scan and looking outside, and we also did some surveys and we're doing some literature reviews, what next? And that's kind of where we're moving.
So when you did the scan, were you looking more for best practices, emerging trends, what the future may hold? What was the focus? What end goal?
Yeah, the goal was kind of best practices, but I'm a bit suspicious about best practices. So I really was just looking for practices, like what's different. We know what we're doing, so what are other people doing that we're not doing? It right away, like instantly, it became fascinating because anytime I talk to like another Canadian federal public service department, they're pretty much all doing some version of the same thing. And there's a few reasons for that. The learning function was gutted, you know, 9 years ago. Also, learning lives under HR in the federal public service and has always been seen as an HR discipline. And that's hugely problematic. But basically, there's not tons that's super interesting going on. CSPS is definitely trying some new innovative things, and there's a lot to look at there, and I appreciate what they're trying to do. They have a hard task because their goal is to serve all public servants, and public servants are so diverse in the outcome of the work that they have to do. I mean, we have every possible job you can imagine, probably someone in the public service is doing it. So it's tricky to centralize to that degree. But then the minute I looked outside and I started calling organizations and wanting to talk about learning, especially the modern digital tech organizations, newer organizations, had a hard time talking about learning because learning is so embedded in everything that they do. It's hard for them to isolate it as something different. So I'll give you an example. I'll talk about Shopify. I spoke to Shopify and several people there. Some people who worked in learning, which is a very small part, and it's primarily it's just there to kind of curate and set up some platforms. Basically, like how do we support employees to capture learning? How do we learn about their learning? How do we help them learn better? But what Shopify has done that's brilliant is they just see that if you let people collaborate, if you encourage them to collaborate, they will learn together. If you help them network and find each other, that if somebody has a problem and they can figure out who to turn to, then they will solve the problem that way. If somebody is stuck, whether it's like their career stuck or they're hitting some kind of interpersonal or whatever, they have coaches available for their employees. So that kind of human side of like what sometimes falls under learning. And so they just don't really talk about it as learning. They're really talking about it as like, how do we help our employees do their best work? That's the problem they're trying to solve, which is very different from how do we help people learn? So how do we help people learn is just a faulty question. You don't have to help people learn. What you need to do is you need to figure out what is it you need them to do and why are they not doing it? And I bet you 90% of the time it's not a learning issue. And so Shopify doesn't really look at learning issues. They just like, oh, this person, there's some obstacle, there's some challenge. Maybe it's not a good fit. Maybe they're in the wrong place. You know, they should be. So then we'll help move them to the work that suits them better. It's not a learning problem. It's like a helping a person. So we call that people-centric, employee-centric. There's all these words around it. But at the end of the day, You have to be, for the learning to be useful, you just have to look at like, where is the person now? Where do you need them to be? And what are the obstacles? And then how do we remove the obstacles? And so that's what's going on outside the world. And it you know, outside of the government, and it's happening in all kinds of different ways, and some are more successful. And but yeah, so talking to people, calling up and saying, hey, I want to talk about learning. They're like, I don't really have much for you, but here's all the other things we're doing. I'm like, okay, so right, you know, there was another organization I spoke with that is a consulting organization, very focused, and the area I was speaking to was talking about leadership and you know, that's sort of what they do their consultation on. And so they have a tool that they use. It's like, you know, in the government, we use DISC. There's all these personality type inventories. They've developed their own. And every employee, like sort of on day one, they get assessed according to this tool. And then this tool gets used, like I've done that tons of times in the government. And this kind of, you spend a day and maybe do a little team exercise, and then it just kind of gets put to bed. But in this organization, they embedded this tool in every single performance conversation. And so what that did was it created a language and a culture around this tool. Now, I'm not saying the tool is perfect, and there's all kinds of problems with that, but it did create a culture, first of all, around here's kind of what we're looking for, that people are different and have different aptitudes and strengths. If you're in an area that's not your strength, how are you going to balance that? Either you're going to try and develop that strength, or you're going to surround yourself with people who can help you in that domain. And another thing they did, well, there's two other things they did that were key, was that every manager in that organization has a coach and is a coach. So they have a coach that is not related to the reporting structure, and they are a coach, but not to their direct reports. So they don't coach their employees. That's a different function. They coach other people. So every manager is a coach and has a coach. So they're developing that whole coaching competency and culture throughout. They use this tool, and then they have regular and ongoing mechanisms to collect feedback on performance, like pulse surveys. If I meet with a client, I can ask the client, hey, would you just fill out this little feedback survey? That goes to my coach, and then the coach helps me interpret the information. And they're doing that all the time, so that every employee is generating a lot of data about their performance, which then helps, you know, it just helps broaden the picture about how is my actual performance, which is an essential part of the map. Like, where am I right now? Where do you need me to go? What are the obstacles? In the federal public service right now, we may have some information about where we need them to be, just because we might know what the job looks like and we have some ideas about how that should be performed. We don't know much about the employee at all. We have this terrible performance management thing that's basically useless for all intents and purposes. We don't have tools that help employees get regular feedback, or for people to give them regular feedback. We don't collect any of that. We don't track it. We don't have frameworks that are consistent. And so it's impossible to have a good learning culture without all of those pieces. Learning is related to performance management, it's related to talent management, it's related to workforce planning, it's related to the systems, the tools, the communications that you use, like everything. So anyway, looking outside, that's how it's happening. It's integrated, it's supporting employees to succeed. Within the government, we have a silo of learning. We have people who do learning. And honestly, in most departments, that's just maintaining compliance products. So the products that are essential because there's some kind of legislation that says every employee has to complete their WHMIS, you know, their workplace health and safety training, or, you know, sexual harassment training or whatever. Yeah, so big divergence.
So in your scan, did you uncover any practices that we used to think worked, and turns out that after, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years of implementation, we realized that, yeah, actually it's not that effective?
Yes. Yes. I would say, you know, and I say this a lot, like my biggest advice to people who work in learning in government, like at all levels, is just stop designing courses. Just stop designing courses. There are very few cases where a course is a useful response to the performance challenges. I can't even actually think of some, but I'm willing to be proven wrong. It's possible that there are courses that are useful. There are probably better courses that you can Google for free. Now, there are some issues with that, like they're not necessarily available in both languages, but I would say that even that is diminishing. And accessibility is certainly something that is really important for, we need to make sure our employees have the tools they need that work for whatever their accommodations they require, you know, so that, they can benefit from that. That's an important role, and I don't want to diminish that. And I would never want that to get lost. But the general idea of a course, so here's just an example. A lot of the time you'll hear when people are asking about how's learning in your organization, they'll ask a question about, like, do you prefer classroom or online learning? As though those are binary, first of all, not even a useful question. And which one do you expect people choose? Which one do you think they like better?
I'm going to say classroom.
Of course, yeah. Because people are social beings and they learn by listening to other people's questions. They learn by collaborating on tasks. So if a classroom course is well designed, which most of them aren't, most of them are just information dumps, but occasionally there'll be some practical activity. And of course, people like that. You know, we're social. It's fun. It's nice to leave your desk and dig your hands in, even if you're just talking about something and inquiring. That's kind of a fresh thing. So people like that. And the other side of it is that we have these terribly boring e-learning products, you know, where you read a screen, you push next, you read a screen. That does not promote learning. That's just information. Learning requires some key things. It requires practice and feedback. If you're not applying instantly what, you know, the information that you're learning about, or the instruction that you're learning, you forget it. That's how our brains are wired. The forgetting curve is very steep. So if you're not applying almost instantly whatever it is you're being shown, and then if you're not getting feedback about that, then there's no learning taking place. It's just information being crammed in. And I mean, that still is, there's still a lot of people in who work in education who think that that is actual learning, but it's not. It's just something different. It's just putting information. So anyway, yeah, so I just tell people, like, stop designing courses, find other ways, you know, and there are things that, so what I'm always interested in is what are people actually doing? So in some cases, and in this organization I'm working in, sometimes the learning product is a 40-page PDF that's what the employee has to read. Okay, well, whatever. People used to learn from manuals. Some people can learn something about what it is they need to perform by reading a manual. Fair enough. It would be great if we could digitize those manuals so they could search them in the moment of need and pull up the information, because they're going to forget. We know people forget. That's just how our brains are designed. Our brains are not designed to store things for long terms. But anyway, but what people do is they read the manual and then they go and find the person who knows how to do. And this is happening everywhere. You ask anyone, how did you learn how to do this? Oh, well, I hit an obstacle, so I went and asked my buddy. Yeah. And then it turns out that in organizations, there are people who tend to get asked more than others because maybe they're just kinder, or they like sharing, or they're good at explaining. And so what they do in what they do purposefully in external organizations is they then develop those people and also give them, if they want, the role as a teacher or a coach or a mentor, you know, or at least they give them time so they're not doing it on the side of their desk. And they see that as an important role to play. And that's an emergent role. You know, those people just kind of show up. And yeah, and we don't do that very much in the government, but it's such a natural human instinct that it's one that I wish we made much better use of. So again, I kind of diverged from your question, but
no, but actually, any practices that surprised you, that were either novel or you didn't think it would be doable in practice?
So surprises, one that surprised me, two, I guess, I hadn't really considered as part of the learning ecosystem until I really started thinking about this. One is the labs and hubs function. So, you know, the innovation labs that have started up were kind of a place for, like in a department, let's say a policy area was looking at, you know, doing some policy work, they would go to the Innovation Hub, and they could experiment, or they could, do some design thinking with whatever the problem was they were trying to solve. But nobody calls that learning, right? Learning is a course, and that is something else. And so when I started to look at all the experimentation and innovation work that's going on, there's actually quite a lot of it, especially when you get down into business lines, smaller business lines. And so that's a really exciting thing. And so what I want to do is I want to include that in learning. Like, learning is not courses. Learning is all the things that help us innovate and, and perform either at the level that we need to perform at, or the level for what's coming next. So that's one. And also the model of the Canadian Digital Service, and this model exists in different ways. But the idea of embedding a team of specialists into another team. So that's how CDS works. Basically, they find an organization that has a particular problem that they want to solve. Yep. CDS sends a team of people who have specialized skills to work with an existing team. So now we've got, the existing team, the CDS team, they work together, they work on solving a problem, on doing some things. CDS extricates itself, but now this term has learned the capacity to do what they did, and now they're able to grow that within the organization. So again, we don't call that learning, but it's a really cool model that we could definitely make more use of. And I'd say the last thing is just the opportunity for mobility. And when I was working with a free agent program, I love this about free agents, but free agents themselves would say, I want learning, which really meant they wanted money to take courses. And I was always like, maybe, but just if you really want to learn about something, find work in that area, even if it's just adjacent to that area, and just start trying things, because the fastest way to learn something is just by getting your hands dirty. And that's why experimentation is really taking off in popularity. Is like the minute you do something, you learn about, what's not going to work, or what might work, and how to make it work if it's already not. And that's learning. That's beautiful. It's exciting. It's fun to be involved in. And so there's definitely, that's also happening within the federal public service, but we're not calling those things learning, and we need to.
What are some of the practices or the trends that you've noticed that and that you would recommend any senior executive to start implementing or bring into their organizations?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a loaded question. Yeah, one thing I learned was in looking at performance agreements for senior executives, most of them, particularly in the organization I'm in, they have learning in their performance agreements. So now they're responsible for learning. And so in their mind, that means they need to do something, offer learning services. Learning isn't a service, right? But now, because it's in their PMA, they're going to offer a learning service. And then they just start courses, or workshops. And frankly, courses and workshops are the easiest things to do. So I would say stop doing that. And, if I love what, this is a bit of a side thing, but I love what the Digital Academy is doing, and, in trying to increase the digital capacity of senior executives, because as soon as you start to think about designing with users as a senior executive, what I think is less important now. I don't have to have the answers. The top down doesn't work. It never worked. It definitely doesn't work now. So as if I'm starting to apply digital principles and I start with, let's just say, design with users, now I actually need to talk to my people. And that means now I'll look at what is working. And you'll find that your people are learning already. They have all kinds of things that they're doing to learn. And if not, why are they not? And take those things out of the way. Often it's because they're way too busy. Learning takes time. You need to have mental space freed up so that you can get curious. You need to have emotional and mental energy. You also need to feel safe. Like, is it okay if I'm not, like this at my desk? Because often people's best thoughts come while they're riding their bicycle or going for a walk or just talking to a colleague over coffee. Or in the shower, yeah, like it's so true. Yeah, so that's a cultural change, and senior executives can start role modeling that. Um, there's all kinds of, once you identify the problem, it's not hard to solve them. Like, you can have days where there's no meetings, or you can just redistribute workload, or as a senior person you can just start saying, no, we're not going to do that because we don't have the capacity, and we need to give people time to collaborate, make it easy to collaborate. Like the organization I'm working with right now, one of the biggest challenges is that we don't have good tools to collaborate. And I know that employees want to collaborate, but it's very hard without the tools. And so, again, not a learning problem, it's a tool problem. And so solve the tool problem.
I really love this idea of removing the obstacles that are get in the way of learning. Can you give us a few more examples? Illustrate what these obstacles actually look like in real life.
Okay, there's so many of them. So I talked about busyness, mobility. Make it easier for them to change roles. Make it easier for people to find out what's going on in other parts of the business. Give people time and permission to leave their desks and explore. The whole PMA process that employees have inhibits learning. People are afraid of what's going to end up on there because it's really the only mechanism for feedback that's formalized. It's what, people will have their performance conversations at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year. And just that structure eliminates iterative, ongoing feedback. They're not exclusive, but this is just what we've done, right? And so, and then people get unafraid to take risks because they're afraid it's going to be written down on their, and with good reason, like that for sure. If I've spent a lot of the year just trying things and failing, maybe I don't want that to be written on my permanent record. But having conversations and in a safe place where people can just be like, hey, I'm trying this stuff out. And like, it looks like I failed, but every time I failed, I've learned something, and because of all those failures, now we're further ahead. That's an incredible benefit. So just start championing and celebrating that. I did a little really loose survey or like inventory scan of the tools that are available at the organization that I work at right now. It's a big organization, so it's not necessarily like this everywhere, but I mean, it's probably like this in a lot of places. And I just looked at like, what are all the things available to an employee to help them perform better? So performing better just meaning like doing my job. Even just not even better, just doing my job. What are all the things available? So I'm looking at like, so the intranet, like the corporate intra website, that counted as one thing. Our corporate intranet probably has tens of thousands of pages on it. There's a directory of all the learning courses and things available. So that counted as another thing. There are at least 100, 200 things in that. And then there's like this know-how, kind of help website. There's what else? And then there's workshops and courses. There's national emails. There's local emails. There's Twitter feeds. There's all the GC tools. There's wikis. There's team meetings. There's communities of practice. There's like the YPN, Young Professionals groups. So anyway, I identified 41 different things that are available like today to help an employee do their job better. And some of those, like I said, like one of those 41 things has at least 200. One of them has at least 10,000 in there. Yeah. Too much. Like, get rid of that stuff. Just stop it. Stop producing noise. So yeah, I mean, so when people talk about how do we help people learn, I'm like, shut up,
So is it producing noise, or is it actually providing a buffet of options for people to find the mechanism that works best for them?
I mean, it does both. But if you know what you're looking for, it's pretty good. If you have some highly developed skills and search, then you're probably fine. But if you're newer to government and you don't know exactly what you're looking for, because we have a language in government which doesn't match the language outside, I'm not just talking French and English, or you may never find what you want, you know, and just the time spent. And then what happens is if you're looking for something, like in the moment I'm looking, I'm motivated, right? I'm like, okay, I'm going to solve this problem. Well, if hours later you haven't found it and all you found is a bunch of useless stuff, like now I'm demotivated. And then what happens is people give up. I do not blame them. And that's a problem, right? The giving up part. So how do we help people? And it's definitely not designing courses. In a lot of cases, it's curating, it's streamlining, it's strengthening the function of those people who can help orient them or help them navigate the system. You know, like career and so learning also is just a huge topic. Like we talk about learning for performance, but it's also like learning for my career, like career development. You know, how do I advance my career? Advancing your career in the government is like, very few people know how to do it well. There's so many mandatory things that you need to always be taken care of, like second language, all the training that you need, whatever it is for your job at hand. You need to have some kind of lens on what might be coming down the pipe. And then if you find gaps, you know, knowing how to solve those gaps. And who do you turn to? Like if you have a good manager, they may be able to give you a little bit of insight, or they may be able to direct you down a path that worked for them. But most managers weren't coached well themselves either. And I was just speaking with someone who works in learning. She was like, what if we had career coaches? I'm like, yeah, wouldn't that be great? Like people who could just help employees who are like, I'm here and I'm interested in this, I'm in this kind of job, but really my skills are here. And I think this might be where we're going in the future. And like, help me make sense of all that, because that is very hard to do in the public service. And so a lot of people just kind of like, you know, they keep working their way up the chain in a place that's not super inspiring because the wilderness is vast. So.
Did you, in your research, did you come across any practice or trends that got you really excited about what the future may hold? Or the art of the possible?
Like the things that get me excited are always the same thing. It's like experimentation. It's like people being allowed to try small things and see what happens. Communities of practice excite me. There were some really strong communities of practice. And those are great. You know, that's a part of the learning ecosystem. The other thing that really gets me excited, and structurally this is difficult to do, but is building teams of diverse skills. So I work in an HR function, and typically in an HR function, you can only hire people who are classified in an HR function, so PEs. And PEs generally aren't data scientists, and they're not research analysts, and they're not, you know, they have a specific skill set. And to solve the problems that we need today, we need a diversity of skills, and it's very hard to hire for that. So again, it's a performance problem that people will be like, oh, well, we'll need to train them, but you can't train people to do all of those things. You just need to bring those skills in. And so again, it solves a problem that people also often classify as a learning problem, but it's not. It's like a staffing classification problem to solve. So that it excites me where people are really pushing the bounds on that, and just, you know, do like here's an example. So in the UK, one of the first things that they did when they were looking, so they're kind of like 5 years ahead of us in the digital transformation sphere, whatever that really means. But, you know, and everyone talks about learning for digital. So that comes across my plate a lot. How are we going to upskill, reskill? I hate those words, employees for digital. And the problem is, again, so it's presented as a learning problem. We need to train these people, or we need to hire, but that's kind of handled separately. So what the UK government digital service did was they right away started to identify what are the skills that we need for the future, like what are these new digital competencies, and they sort of mapped that out, and they assigned them, and then they took care of the classification. They took care of all the financials, so like how much are these people going to need to be compensated so that it's attractive, you know, for people who come in from the outside. So they handled all of that stuff, and now when they find those skills, they can bring them in. In the absence of that, there are amazing people who want to work for the government, but we can't pay them what they're worth, or we can't classify them adequately. And so again, it's a capacity problem, but people are handling it the wrong way. You got to handle the structure, and classification is a huge obstacle to us having the talent that we need. And so I love that GDS, that was part of their capacity building, their learning strategy was like, let's fix the framework so we can hire the people with the skills that we need. And then once you have those skills internally, then there's the ripple effect, right? Like if I'm working alongside of someone, like it's happening right now, for the first time in my life, I'm working with a data scientist, PhD psychologist, brilliant man, because we're doing surveys and we're doing research, and thank God we have him, because he keeps us to a discipline on research and survey design like I've never experienced. So I'm learning all that, and I wouldn't call myself anywhere near an expert, but now at least I know what to look for. And in government, people, you know, we're always trying to engage, and people create surveys. Like survey design is very difficult, and I'm actually better at it than the average person, but because of, you know, all my work in assessment previously, but I have just learned so much more. So that's what happens when you bring the talent in, it ripples, and people learn just by proximity. So that's an exciting thing that we're starting to do.
You mentioned experimentation, and gets me curious, if you were given a big sandbox within which you can play and try new things, what are some of the ideas that you would like to try?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would definitely be building the capacity of peer helpers, for lack of a better word, like just taking an area, maybe an area of like 50 people or a call center or something, looking at who are those people who are the natural helpers, who people naturally turn to for advice, and then developing their capacity, giving them time. So just giving them time probably is the first thing. And then what tools and supports do they need to continue doing that role? And also just documenting more stuff. Like we just don't document enough stuff in a way that it's retrievable. So call centers are a great example. I talked to quite a few employees in call centers, and also people who work in call center training. And it turns out like the biggest challenge for call center employees is to retrieve information in the moment they need it, you know? And because what happens is they retrieve information, but they don't know how accurate that is. Is it old information? Once they actually find it, you know, in those 41 buckets that I outlined, they find what they need, but is it really accurate? So to that, and that's kind of a tool more than anything else. So develop a tool that helps people when they come upon a new question. So somebody calls the call center, it's a new question. The person who receives the call can enter that question. Somehow that's viewed by a bunch of experts who can answer the question, and it gets like a stamp of validity. And then that's constantly being reviewed and curated so that the call center employees can trust the tools that they're using. It's live, it's always up to date. So and I'm not able to design any of that, but just even focusing on that as a solution rather than more training would be really exciting for me.
So when you're gonna, I understand that you're starting to share your work internally in your organization. Hopefully, it will get shared beyond the organization because it's
It's the
really
plan.
interesting. What do you hope will be the main takeaways from that piece of research work for whoever takes a look at it?
So I think for those departments that are small and who feel like they can't have an impact on learning, I want to broaden the conversation of like, here's all the things in the learning ecosystem. And if you can help start connecting those dots so that employees see those as learning activities and managers see those as learning activities, and the organization sees those as learning activities, you'll understand how rich you are in learning. which will support those poor learning professionals who are struggling to try and do something with no time or money. And also change the conversations. Government employees are rich in learning opportunities. And it hurts my heart when people say, I don't have an opportunity to learn. Well, yes, you do, but you just don't really know what that means. You're looking for courses, and we're done with that, you know? And so I want to change the conversation on learning, you know, like, and bring it back to like, at both levels, like at the organizational level, like how do we talk about learning ecosystems, and what does that mean, and how do we show people that this is a rich, you know, and that we learn by doing, and that we learn by talking and working together, we learn by trying new things, really, you know, that's the conversation. And then at the employee level, the focusing the learning conversation on what this particular employee, one at a time, what is it that they need to succeed? And then let's give that to them. So whether it's, you know, take away something or give them something or move them somewhere where they'll be better suited, whatever it is, like let's one at a time. And so helping managers know how to do that. Small wishes.
That's a great place to wrap it up. But before we do, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't on that topic and that specific piece of research that you've been doing for the last few months?
I don't think so. This conversation I'm happy with how it went, because we got to talk about a lot of things. And I think at the end of the day, the thing I really want to leave people with is that learning is not schooling. And yeah, we need to talk about the whole picture, and we should talk about performance and tools and culture. And I think we did that. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to viewing, reading, or learning more about your findings.
Sure. So be soon.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.